once this energy starts to come through you, once you really start to grow and expand, the base, the structure has to be solid.
Hello, and welcome back to the Live Young podcast. Today, I am joined with my guest, David Sudcliffe, and I'm super excited for this conversation because I had the honor of seeing an interview that David hosted a couple of weeks ago in Austin, and he held such a beautiful space that I was like, you know what? I want to share space with this person and understand more about him. So here we are. Welcome.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, me too. Well, let's just start with what seems to be the obvious, that you are a retired actor that is very well known for your role on Gilmore Girls. Yes.
Right. Yeah. I was an actor for, 25 years, I think. Long time.
I have to be honest, I never watched Gilmore Girls. I know.
That's okay.
Yeah,
People say that to me all the time, and they apologize. I'm like, you don't have to apologize. There's a lot of shows out there.
Yeah, I feel like I don't even know when in my life I watched television, but it wasn't like I didn't want to watch it. It was just it wasn't part of my life. So I have to just be honest with you. That said, okay, so now in this new iteration of your life, you sort of moved from acting, an active choice, to get into more of like somatic therapy and core energetics. Can you just explain to anyone listening what that means, what your work is now?
Yes, I am trained in core energetics. It's a somatic psychotherapy. It evolved out of the work of Wilhelm Reich and then Alexander Lowen, who was the creator of bioenergetics. A lot of people have heard of bioenergetics. And then a guy by the name of John Parakis, a psychiatrist, partnered up with Lowen in the 70s, and they created this modality called core energetics. And the concept of it is basically that we have feelings and emotions that are held in our bodies. And, maybe that's figurative to some degree, but at any rate, when you work with the body to express, it can liberate these emotions and also expand your consciousness. And I had been in therapy for a number of years before I discovered this modality, and I took to it immediately. It was exactly the thing that I was looking for. It seemed obvious and self-evident. Instead of simply talking about my problems and understanding some of the things that happened in my childhood and how they were impacting the way I was thinking and living as an adult, this got directly into my feelings. It allowed me to feel my feelings. And that was incredibly liberating, both physiologically, but also psychologically. And I felt like it enabled me to get to the root of my issues much more quickly, with more precision. And it had a, very powerful impact on my life. And I just became fascinated with it, particularly when it was done in a group setting. Originally, I started it with just one-on-one therapy, and then that evolved into workshops and retreats. And there was a woman by the name of Anne Bradney who she called her workshops radical aliveness. And there was something about the way that she worked with groups that just lit me up. There was a wildness to it, a loss of control. And the invitation was, you don't have to hold back. And I think a lot of us, we hold back all the time. And so that invitation to not hold back was really exciting to me. And so that was really, when I discovered her work, that was really the beginning of the end of my acting career, because it wasn't a moment where I decided like, oh, I'm quitting acting, but all of my interest and passion started to go toward the work and away from acting. And I ended up enrolling in her program, and it just sort of evolved from there.
It's so interesting just hearing you speak to this, because, if you're listening, somatic, soma means body. And, as you're explaining your experience in this work, it just is so resonant to me, because it wasn't conscious for me, but my, journey into like starting a fitness concept that was like specifically boxing and yoga, like 9 rounds in a heavy bag with an invitation to just go wild, no mirrors, to the beat of the music with loud like noise and red light. Almost I've created this like personal hell, so that at the end of that, it was like gloves off into this openness, like jazz, Ella Fitzgerald. and this lengthened breath where people were then invited to like release from other side of self. And for me, that was somatic therapy. That's how I created space, held space from my own experience of having boxed and done yoga since I was young to try and understand these feelings and get them out of me. So in a very different way, but almost with the same intention, you know?
Absolutely. That sounds amazing.
Yeah, it was super special and unique, profound. And like the doors of my studio said, everything you need is inside. So like same, this body holds all of this stuff. And if we don't find a way to release and clean and clear our energy, we just become the amalgamation of all this shit and stuff that we're carrying.
That's right. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. It was, yeah, the
Yeah.
exact same principle. I mean, what core energetics did, there was a woman that John Parakis was married to. Her name was Eva Parakis, and she brought a kind of psycho-spiritual aspect to the work through a series of which she claimed were channeled lectures that are called the Pathwork lectures. And
Mhm.
so that heavily informed the philosophy of the work and really grounded it in something concrete. And yeah, just that, like I mentioned that because there's something about also the philosophy of the work that I think is really different than anything else out there. I mean, fundamentally it's the same, but there's a way, there's a way in to understanding that, again, I just completely resonated with. It made total sense to me. And in particular, it's this idea of what they call the lower self. I mean, they have three layers of consciousness: higher self, lower self, mask. The mask you might call the adapted self or the identity self or the ego, and the higher self, I think we all know what that is. But this idea of the lower self was a little bit different than the way we think of the shadow. It was really the dark energy inside us that serves as a protection, a defense against pain. And the mechanisms of that lower self energy, in the way that they described it and worked with it, it felt like this deep truth, and this idea that there is a part of us that wants to, or in the place that we were hurt, that wants to exact revenge, punish, that hates. And those are hard places to own in ourselves. And we're not comfortable with it. We want to often, bypass it. But what this work really showed me is that going into those shadow emotions, those feelings, the ugly aspect of ourselves, and understanding exactly what it is. It's a defense. It's a place where we're protecting ourselves from fear and pain. That going into those feelings was actually the path, really the gateway to the higher self.
Yeah, interesting. When you are speaking of this, it reminds me a bit of IFS therapy,
Mm-hmm.
and like the protector parts. And the protectors are the part of us that could be the ones that lash out, but they're only there to protect us from those lower self parts, that the fear, the shame, whatever else that I believe we have to excavate and face so that we can integrate them and live our lives like as a whole person. And
Yes.
in an interesting way too, like this, it's funny to hear something and then from my brain, how it extracted it was like, okay, heavy bag, 9 rounds, you're going to face all parts of you and everything's going to come up and you're going to do your best to, like, even if you're not conscious of it, get it out. Because until I believe, especially for women, but I do believe men are no different in the sense, like honoring the sacred rage or the anger or the fire, the darkness, whatever that is inside of us, the shame, all of these lower self parts, honoring them because they served a purpose for some reason. They were there for some reason, and seeing them as that, and also giving them love, the parts of us that needed that.
Right.
So, and then, and I think not shaming them further, like not casting them off, because I think that the lower you step them down, the more they're going to explode, which is why people lose their shit. So I think seeing, for me in my like trauma journey or healing journey, finding the gifts that all of this shit gave me, so that I can just see it for what it is instead of continuing to keep it like in the closet. So I don't know if that sort of resonates to what you're saying, but I think that there's
Yeah.
a parallel.
Yeah, absolutely. That all of that resonates with me, and the way that you're thinking about it is very much the way that I think about it. And it sounds like what you were doing in your studio with your classes is very similar to what I'm doing in my workshops. I mean, fundamentally, the intention is really the same.
Yeah. And in that, it was like when I did this and I went on this journey, I had no conscious memory of, and I didn't know what I was fighting. So it was almost my like path to discovery of like what the hell was inside me that then led
Right.
to plant medicine, which I think is another really potent tool. I'm not sure your experience with it, but like it showed me all of the blind spots and like the scenes in my head or in my body or the places where I had stuck energy in my life. So I can like then, take it all out, parse it out and be like, and then use these tools to like reintegrate them. So I don't know, is in core energetics, I don't think that you use plant medicine, but I assume, or I shouldn't assume, in your path, has that played a role? Have psychedelics played a role for you?
Yeah, I went down the ayahuasca rabbit hole pretty deep for about 4 years. I mean, I don't know how many ceremonies, 60, 70, 80 ceremonies, something. I lived with a Shipibo shaman for 2 years in LA. So obviously, there was a lot of ayahuasca around, and I learned a lot from him. And yeah, I went deep into that world, and yeah, it was very powerful. It's very powerful medicine. I don't, I always want to say it's not for everybody, and you really have to feel called for it, and you really want to find people who know what they're doing and who are responsible with it, because you're inviting in a lot of chaos, because it takes you out of control, and it's scary. And I think you want to make sure that you have enough grounding or ego structure to really be able to handle, but most importantly, integrate the experience. So I hadn't started with plant medicine until after I finished with all of my training in core energetics. So I felt like I had a solid foundation. Once I was having these experiences, I had a framework to think about it, which I think was really helpful. But more than any, I mean, I learned a lot of the things that you're talking about. But more than anything, it was a practice of surrendering.
Mhm.
And, I could really feel the places where I didn't want to surrender, where I was resisting, wanting to control. And, if you're going to do that during an ayahuasca ceremony, you're going to suffer quite a bit. And so the practice for me was just surrendering over and over and over again, and letting go and trusting, and going on the journey, and understanding that I don't have control over everything. And that when you do surrender in that way, when you do let go and let this medicine take over, there actually is a way that you can navigate it. But it's a different kind of navigation. And so I really felt like that's what it taught me. It's like surfing. You can't control the ocean. That's a force that is much bigger than you, and if you're not careful, it will drown you. But if you're mindful and you're skillful, you can learn to surf those waves, and get a lot from that. So that's why I did it. I wanted to learn to surf it, and understand it, and then there came a time when I just felt like I was done. It wasn't useful for me anymore, and but I'm really glad that I had that experience, and there was a lot of community, and the music is beautiful, and it's just a whole world that opens up to you, and it
Yeah.
really informs your fundamental orientation to reality.
I mean, I couldn't agree more. And I also think that there's a time and a place, and it isn't for everyone. And it needs to be handled with such like loving care. And it is not even like an active ingredient, it is a life force of its own, like the ocean. And it's interesting. I'm working on a book, and I have been for some time, because really trying to chronicle both the tools, the gifts, the lessons, and the story, and sort of integrate it as a writer. And some point, the agent I was working with was really heavy handed on it needing to be about plant medicine. And my intuition was just so strong, like, no. And I really wanted this deal. But I don't believe the journey is about plant medicine. I believe plant medicine is a tool that can unlock a part of the journey. And I think if anyone is listening to this, it feels called to the medicine or is curious about it, like just like you said, the call, answer the call, it's beautiful. And the work isn't the medicine. The medicine is just a part of the pie. Yeah.
That's
It's like
right.
the
Yeah.
cheese on top. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and it's ayahuasca in particular is very unique, and it opens up a world that is can be a little scary, but once you get acquainted with it, there's a lot of interesting information in there, not just about yourself, but as I said, about really about the fundamental nature of reality and the kind of cosmos. Really, it's hard to describe.
Totally. It's interesting when you even say that because I know you, and I'd love to hear more that you predominantly work with a lot of men and you do men's groups. The first time I did ayahuasca, I was in a very serious relationship. And in this first ceremony, it sounds so silly, but it was like the first time I ever sat with, the reflection of myself and this depth of like punch in the face of like my deep feeling of unlovable. And though I had lived in that my whole life, it was never conscious to me. I was just, operating and activating from that place. And so after the ceremony and coming up with this like deep feeling of unlovable and realizing he was just reflecting me, the shadow aspect after, because like I wasn't fully integrated and I sort of jumped back into reality quite quickly. And him and I were having dinner, and at some point we're driving, and I said, either I'm intolerable or we're just fucking wasting our time. Just like that. And like,
Wow.
yeah, that was like the first thing. And then we were like intimate a couple days later. And I think he like afterwards, he was like so concerned about my pleasure, which was so beautiful. And I said to him, I go, I wish you just could be a little bit meaner to me. And it was just like in this moment. And it was really, again, it was just the fact that I could not receive love because I didn't feel I was worthy of it. And so ayahuasca literally like pulled all this up out of me. And
Yeah.
I was reacting from the space of like my shadow revealing itself of me believing that. And that's why I was behaving in such a way.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it was like when you say force and that it opens up to the cosmos, and it's something like it's hard to even describe experience. I mean, that's why it's interesting too. People are like, should I just go do ayahuasca? And I'm like, no. Absolutely not. like it scares me that in our culture today, it's become so mainstream that, someone who's never done any introspection even is like, well, I'm just going to
Yeah.
go. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. It's yeah, you need to be careful with it. And it's a powerful tool.
It's a very powerful tool. Yeah. I was listening to your recent podcast that you recorded, and also you had mentioned this in the Danny Morell interview, and you were talking about this video equipment, and there was like a theft and someone stole all your stuff. And you said something, you said, these things, they have meaning. It's like a scene in a movie, and I want to know what the scene is about. And I loved that because I don't personally believe in coincidence. And I do believe that when things happen, first it's typically like a whisper, and then it's a scream, and then it's just like all your shit's
Right.
spilled, whatever. So I'm curious. I mean, you don't have to go into what happened, but like, I don't know. Are you, maybe you want to.
Well, I mean, I guess I'll talk first about my orientation to life that is reflected in this idea that the events of my life, I see them like a movie or maybe a dream. I mean, I see anything that happens that feels significant to me, I try to step back from. I try to remove myself from it the way that I would analyze a dream and ask myself like what is the meaning of this? Why is this happening? And how did I co-create it? Like what is reality is reflecting something back to me, and what is it that I'm unwilling to see or can't see, that I need to see? Something is speaking to me, and so whenever something significant happens, yeah, I'm asking myself a lot of questions. I don't beat myself up about it because we're always learning and growing, and the blind spots are always there. I think, I don't think we get to a place where we're fully realized and actualized and we don't have any more issues. I mean, what would be the point, really? So, I'm humble to all of it. But yeah, I mean, specifically with the camera equipment, and I wrote about this in my newsletter. It wasn't just the camera equipment. There were a series of events, like somebody hacked into my Facebook and took over my Facebook page. And that was ultimately my fault. And there was a few other things that happened, and they happened all within a short period of time, like 3-4 weeks. And I hadn't had anything like that happen to me in a long time. So it was very strange. And the meaning I made of it was just, well, I looked at all of the situations and I thought, well, like, where am I at fault here? If I don't make myself a victim, like, what did I not think about? What did I avoid? What did I not want to deal with? Like, how did I contribute to all of this happening? And in every case, there was evidence that I had not been listening to my intuition, or that there was things that I knew I needed to take care of that I kept putting off or avoiding. And I think life was saying to me, or, life, my higher self, God, if you want expansion, and I feel like I'm in a moment of expansion in my life, you're going to have to shore up some of these things that you've been avoiding. Your container is a little bit leaky, and it was showing me specifically where it's leaky. And pain will make you look at things, will force you to deal with things. You have a leaky roof, and maybe you put a bucket out, but you don't get the roof fixed. And then all of a sudden you get a heavy rain and the roof caves in, and, your floor is ruined, your couch is ruined. And then, you deal with it. But maybe you should have dealt with it when the roof was leaking originally. And I think that's essentially what happened for me. And so all these things that I've been putting off, I've since been dealing with. And then really it was a message of, you have to trust your intuition. Like, you have to listen to that voice. Like, even if it makes no sense, you have to give over to it. I mean, the odds of somebody breaking into my studio are it's low. They're extremely low. Nevertheless, I had an intuition that it was going to happen. I sensed it. I bought a camera bag specifically to pack up my equipment every night and take it home in case the studio got broken into. But I never did that. And so I had the intuition to get at the camera bag, but I didn't follow through. And so it was just, yeah, that's how I saw it. It's like, okay.
Do you ever feel like when you don't follow the intuition, there's a self-sabotager that is trying to prove you right? Or just like the test of like, is my intuition right? Or you don't think it's that deep?
Maybe, could be. I've never thought of it that way, but I think my ego wants to stay in control. And if I start surrendering to my intuition, which from my ego's point of view is irrational, then the ego is no longer in control. And so there's that battle going on, I think, between us all the time. And the ego is very tricky, and it comes at us in infinite ways. I mean, mostly it rationalizes, but it's very persuasive. And if we're not conscious and present with ourselves, it's very easy for it to get in. So I'm somebody who, I have a lot going on. I can get really, really busy and feel like my days are full. And I always feels like I'm on the edge of not overwhelmed, but like at the edge of my capacity. And in that place, I can lose presence. And so in the place where I lose presence, where I'm not really with myself, that's where bad things happen. So it was also, I mean, there was a lot of things that were happening. It was just like, if you want this expansion, this is the message that I got. And I really prayed on it, and I got a clear message. If you want this expansion that wants to come through you, that you're working towards, that it feels like it's right there, you're going to have to shore up your container. You're going to have to take care of all these little things that you've been putting off, that you've been avoiding. Those little things are important. They're very, very important now. And because once this energy starts to come through you, once you really start to grow and expand, the base, the structure has to be solid. Like you want to build a boat going across the ocean, you better make sure that boat is well built, that there's no leaks, and that you have the tools to repair it out on the ocean if something goes wrong. Like, you have to think of everything, because you don't want to be dealing with a rinky-dink boat when you're out in the middle of the ocean with the storms. You want to know that container is solid. And that's the message I got from it, which, to be honest, felt really good. It's like, oh, okay, I gotta shore up my boat. I gotta shore up my container. I know exactly what I have to do. I could write that list out immediately and go through it. And the doing of that is actually very gratifying. It's like when we finally decide to clean out our garage or clean out our closet, we've been putting it off forever. When we actually do it, the first maybe 15 minutes is like, this is overwhelming. But once you're into it, you actually enjoy doing it, because you can feel that this chaos, this mess is about to be ordered, and something starts driving you forward, and you feel really good on the other side of it. So I'm not happy that all this camera equipment got stolen, but whatever, it's replaceable. But I'm really grateful for the lesson.
Mhm.
And I guess I had to learn that lesson in a painful way.
Funny, I always say like flow through the fight. And this was back with my fitness studios, but this idea of finding ease through resistance, because it's whether you're cleaning out a garage, as you said, or like stepping onto a run, the first thing you're going to do after like the first three steps is want to stop in any
Yeah,
belief. And I don't believe like these things get easier, but I think there's like a
I get harder as you get older. I
yeah.
can tell you that from experience.
Yeah, but I think in that, what you're telling me too is that you've allowed yourself to soften into them. It's like you might resist the test at first, the whisper, you don't want to give in to the intuition because the ego and the struggle. But at some point when you honor, it's there to serve you. Like there's so much joy on the other side, same as like a clean garage. So I think like this idea of expansion, there's an excitement, or I sense excitement because you're creating more space for something even more beautiful to occur once you kind of clean out the shit that you don't need anymore.
Yeah, you have to make the assumption that life is always working in your favor. So even when the bad things happen, it's trying to show you something
Yeah.
that's in your
Yeah.
favor.
Beautiful. So thank you for mentioning that, and like louder for the people in the back, because, so many of my listeners, just because of the transparency in which I've shared my journey and story and hardships and whatever else, I know, and just because it is a series of challenges and growth opportunities and also a lot of hardship. So if you're going through something right now, like do as David says, it is there to serve you, to teach you, to propel you into what is next for you. And I mean, I don't know how you feel about this, but the more you resist it, the more it will resist back. So I do think like ultimately life is a series of surrender. And I think that's the hardest part.
Yeah, that's exactly right. My mantra, which I learned in Mexico with a very intense Shipibo shaman, sat with him for 4 ceremonies that were just absolutely overwhelming, very strong medicine, and the Shipibo chants were extremely confronting. So I was hanging on for dear life the entire time. The mantra that I used to get through it was yes, thank you. And I just kept repeating that over and over. Yes is the surrender, and thank you is the gratitude. So that's the mantra that I try to use in these situations where life is difficult, or I'm experiencing frustration, or some kind of mishap, or I've made a mistake, whatever it is, a breakup, fight. Yes, thank you. It's always teaching me something. And in some way more than, relationship, I think teaches you that as much as anything. Like with my fiance, the place that we've gotten to, which feels really good, is whenever there's a fight, there is some part of our brain that is now wired to know that there's something in the shadows, and this fight is going to bring it up, and it's painful and or scary for both of us. But on the other side of this, there is going to be more connection, and our relationship is going to be deeper. And so if you know that on some level in the midst of the fight, it gives it a little grace and separates you from the story of what you're fighting about, because of course the fight is never really about what it's about.
Right.
And I think that's just true everywhere. We get caught in the story and the narrative. It wasn't about the camera equipment.
Right.
I could have blamed somebody, the woman who owns the building, and she didn't have her cameras on, and she did. There was things that could have been different, could have been avoided, but that's not what it's about, right?
Right.
It was this was something that came into my field, and so I have to pay attention to it. And
Yeah.
I try to take responsibility. I don't always, or at least in the moment, but I try as quickly as I can to take responsibility for everything that's happening in my life, because otherwise I'm a victim.
Right.
And when you're a victim, you're powerless, and you have no autonomy, you have no control. And that's the only thing you're going to feel in that place is really despair and helplessness.
Yeah. I mean, the word that just keeps coming to me is like hope. I think when you see through this lens of like it's happening for you, to teach you, to serve you, even if that means like looking into a deeper depth of yourself where there is hurt, shame, fear, shadow, whatever, by looking at that, you're actually doing yourself a service as opposed to avoiding it. So it's really beautiful to hear a man specifically speak to this, because I think, as I said, there's like a softness and a depth to it. And I find it really interesting that you went from such an external career, acting, everything about acting is, you're not even yourself, you're playing a role so that other people receive you, accept you, like you. And then this switch to sort of go into the depth of self and live in a space of that introspection where everything becomes a reflection. And I honor it because I know, like, I've done the same thing in a different way, but it's lovely to hear, because also for anyone listening, what we experience outside of ourselves is literally, as you said, a reflection of what is going on internally. So like, what was that? I mean, granted, it wasn't just like I'm quitting acting so I can understand myself, but like, how do you dance with that now? Or do you dance with it, or it has no role in your life at all? Like the external versus internal, your past versus your present.
Well, I think we have both. I mean, we live in a world where, whether it's online, like you have a virtual character. I mean, we're all performing in some way. And even when we go out to a party, and we're showing up in we're never perfectly authentic in every moment. Nobody's speaking the truth in every moment. And not that that's bad. It's because sometimes it's not appropriate, and different circumstances require different things of us. So I guess, I remember Marlon Brando was being interviewed, and somebody was asking what it was like to be an actor. And he said, we're all actors. Everybody's acting all the time. And I think that's true. I think what acting gave me was I got very comfortable with people looking at me and being in my work, which is, and being looked at, being, filmed and having it then judged. And that it can make you very neurotic, and it's exposing, and it's vulnerable. And conquering that fear and just getting on with it gave me a lot of power, because I finally did that. It wasn't an easy thing for me to do. I wasn't a natural. I mean, I was a natural in the sense that I was a good actor from the beginning. I had good instincts. I understood the scene. I knew how to play it, like the kind of basics, and I had the right look, obviously. That's an important part of it. But, to really be able to perform, when the camera's rolling, when the lights are on you, when there's a lot of money invested in the situation, and a lot of other good actors out there that you're competing against, that being able to do that, to perform, gave me a lot of confidence. Like, to make it in Hollywood is not an easy thing to do. It's extremely competitive. And so the fact that I was able to do that, it felt like a major accomplishment. And so it gives me a confidence. It's not the acting so much. I mean, like I said, there is something I'm comfortable being looked at, observed, and to basically be myself. But also just anything that you set your mind to do and then you do it, that gives you a lot of confidence. And so you think, well, what's the next thing I want to do? I can probably do that too. And I think because there's a lot of like romance around Hollywood, and people, it exists as an iconic thing in a lot of people's minds. That all got demystified for me. So I saw it for what it was. And that's also a good feeling, to come into the reality of what things are. And so once I saw what Hollywood really was, then, you look around and you start to see other things for what they really are. And that also empowers you, because you realize, like, there's nothing out there that's not obtainable or that's beyond you. It's just human beings doing their thing. And there's some good human beings, and there's some bad human beings, and there's some really smart people, and there's some not so smart people. And everybody's got their issues, and everybody's got their insecurities, and people are competitive and petty, but they're also very loving and supportive. Like, it's the same wherever you go, whatever you're doing. And Hollywood is no different from anything else.
Yeah. So in that, it's funny because, maybe not funny, but like some of the work you do now, just via social media or your podcast, interviewing very externally, bright people like an Andrew Tate, or
Right.
what's the guy's name? The Barbie guy? What's Barbie? Ken.
Candy Ken.
I watched it. I was like, I wasn't familiar with him, but that was, super interesting. In that, you're speaking to this performative, environment that we work in or live in. But beyond that, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, do you work predominantly with men or no in your practice?
No, no,
No.
I work with a lot of women, and I
Okay.
have worked with a lot of women. Yeah.
So speaking to Candy Ken, Andrew Tate, whatever, this idea or this, there's a lot in what I've experienced. And I also think there's a lot of emphasis on it, but like, this term toxic masculinity and what that looks like in today's day and age and why women don't like nice guys. It's all sort of packaged, I think, in this like stew of misunderstanding and misrepresentation and everyone playing this role. And then, the show of the YouTube celebrity or, it's almost comical, but I would love your take on what's going on in this stew, if you will.
What you mean specifically around like gender
Or like
and
toxic masculinity and why women don't like nice guys and are they even nice guys or
mm.
why everyone's putting on this show and where this comes in.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a big topic and I'll speak to it and I'll just say that I'll speak to one aspect of it. I'm not going to get everything right. You're not going to include all perspectives. Obviously, this is a big conversation. But what I'll say is, and I'll speak from my experience. I grew up in the 80s, really. It was in high school in the 80s, and it was sort of post 60s, 70s feminism. And my experience was just, okay, men and women are equal. I never had any other idea, in part because I grew up with a single mom and she worked and she was powerful. And, the gender roles weren't that real defined in my household. So that's what I grew up with. I also grew up with women very dominant in my family. Like our family was really much more matriarchal. It was the women who controlled things. And so it wasn't until I got to university where I, really got blasted with feminism. And I was told that men and women are the same and you should treat women the same way that you treat men. And I was young and I was like, okay, sure. If that makes sense. And so that's what I did. So it was like, splitting the bill and all the things. I just treated them like I would a guy mostly. I mean, I was romantic, but in terms of all those little things, until I got a girlfriend who was from Texas. And she said, no, I need a gentleman. You need to open the car door. You need to do all of these things. That's how I like it. And I started to realize, that's how I like it too. And there was something in the chivalry that felt really good and right to me. And so I think what happened for me is what happened to a lot of men is that they stepped back a little bit as women were coming out and saying, we feel underrepresented, we feel underappreciated, we want more freedom. And I think a lot of men stepped back and I think they had good intentions, but I think it left women actually frustrated because I think there's something beautiful in the gender dynamic in traditional masculine, feminine roles. It doesn't have to be 1950s style with the man, working and the woman in the kitchen, but the energy of it. Right. It's masculine, feminine energy. It's yin and yang. It's universal. And once you really understand that, and because the relationship that I have with Diana, my fiance, we're very traditional, very masculine, feminine. And it took a while for us to get there because we both had baggage, that we were bringing to it. And shame, frankly. I felt shamed about wanting a more traditional woman, and she felt shame about wanting a more traditional man because some part of us felt that it was wrong. And so we finally were able to surrender to that, and we're extremely happy now. And of course, we feel in absolute equality because there is a kind of harmony that exists there. I always say nature it seeks balance, it seeks harmony, and balance, not sort of quote unquote equality, right? Like 50-50 equality. I don't think that's really a thing. And of course, it depends how you measure equality. So all of that said, I think this is all being played out in the culture. So when you see somebody like Andrew Tate, well, what is he doing? Well, he's representing an extreme pole of masculinity. Well, that wouldn't exist and would need to exist if there wasn't the pendulum hadn't swung too far the other way. And I think when I saw Andrew Tate, it's like, yeah, he's extreme and, but he's upfront about what he thinks. He's not hiding it. This is what he wants. And so the women who are going to get into a relationship with him, there's no surprises. This is what he's doing. This is what he's offering. You can take it or leave it. And, fair enough. right? That's the way I saw it. And it was interesting to me the way so many people reacting to him as though he was somehow misogynist. And I get why they would think that, but I didn't really see it that way. I felt like he was just asserting what he wanted and how he saw things. And the fact that I think so many people were offended by that, really, and it's one thing to be, you disagree, that's fine, but the that they were so offended and upset by it, that told me that there was something in what he was saying, even though it was extreme, something in what he was saying that was true. And that I think that there's a longing for more traditional masculine, feminine dynamics, and that I think women naturally want the man generally, again, I don't want to make blanket statements, not 100%, that women want the man to provide and to protect, and that women are generally oriented towards nurturing, and that it makes sense. Like, if you want the things that you want, like, I'm going to nurture my man, I'm going to love my man, he's going to be stronger, and so he's going to go out in the world and he's going to be able to get more resources, feel better about himself, and conquer, which is good for the woman. So it's all like a cycle. And if we get our egos out of it, and just let go to what the kind of animal inside of us wants and longs for, then I think everything can kind of fall into place. But I mean, that's not really answering your question about toxic masculinity. I mean,
Yeah, no, we can get that in a second, but I want to speak to, just what you said too. It's interesting because I think I do agree with you. I think that is what I think women do want to be provided for and protected if they are in their femininity. And I think that a man who wants a more traditional home and wants to be nurtured and cared for, I long for that. I really believe in that. Do you think that when a woman comes out, right, and says, like, I want to be taken care of, that it's received the same way as a man saying, well, I want to be nurtured? Like, is it, you know what I mean? Because there can be very, like, could be very polarized. Like, a man just, I want a woman at home, and a woman just being like, I just want everything taken care of.
Well, I mean, listen, everybody's got to play their role, right? It's like taking care of a man, that's a lot of work. Like taking care of the home. You know what I mean? Well, no, there's responsibilities, right? Like that's kind of what I figured out in my relationship. It's like we each have responsibilities.
Yeah.
And so I've decided to take on the responsibility of the provider. So it's like, she's not concerned with that. I'm concerned with that. I carry the burden of that. It's not that she doesn't work. She does work. But I'm like, I don't want you to worry about money. I don't want you to think about money. I don't want you to worry about money. Right. I've got that. Just let me handle that, and you don't have to worry about that. And when she finally surrendered to that, it was obviously a relief for her. Like, she didn't, I've got it. I'm holding that. Well, that's an immense responsibility for me. I go from supporting one person, now I have to support two, and, maybe three, maybe four along the way. But it forces me to rise up. And it forces me to think in a different way. It forces me to take more responsibility. Well, she also has responsibility, right? If I'm going to be providing, then, what is she offering in that sense? And so what I've noticed is that it's activated this nurturing instinct inside her that wasn't there when we first started dating. And it's not something that I've even asked for. It's happened automatically because it's in support of, not of me, but of the relationship. And so when each person takes responsibility for their role in the relationship, and each has a tremendous responsibility, I think everything kind of cares of itself. But I think women, if that's what you want, that's what you should. I mean, I work with women all the time, and I have this conversation. And I always start it with, like, do you want a man to take care of you? And they're like, well, no, yeah. I'm like, well, no, so, and I gently, and every time they're like, yeah, perfect world. Yeah. I would not want to have to worry about money, and I would want him to provide. I'm like, okay, well, then you should get what you want. You should hold that, because I'm telling you, that's what men want. Most men. And so you can ask for that, you don't have to settle for something else. And I think that's, there's a way it can be like, you need to provide for me, just the same way a man can be like, you need to cook for me. Like,
right.
That's not that energy is obviously not going to be helpful, because there's an entitlement to it. Right. But if you don't feel entitled.
Right. It's interesting when you say you were brought up in like a more matriarchal experience, like me, totally opposite. Like, father, entrepreneur, three brothers. Like my family's in the meat business, very masculine, very like, and I mean, literally like
Meat.
my meat, lots
Yeah.
of, and my mom is a lawyer, but she never practiced. And she was like, she got married when she was 20. She had 4 kids, PTA president, cooked dinner every night, like took us to school, like my mother was home. And I think in my
Right.
relationships, and also my father was the consummate entrepreneur, like built his business from dirt, and how he thought that he provided and created safety was through providing. So there was no emotional
Yeah.
connection. And it wasn't because he didn't want to, he didn't know how to, because he's 79 and he comes from a different age and I was the only girl, whatever else. So I wanted to be seen by my dad. So everyone works for my dad. I moved to New York and built my own business because I wanted to be an entrepreneur like my dad. Like I became the masculine in so many.
Interesting. Yeah.
And I only dated super successful, emotionally retarded men who
Uh-huh.
didn't, so they took care of me. But what I really wanted wasn't financial taking care of. I wanted to feel safe, protected, seen, love language, quality time, all of that stuff.
Sure.
It's been so interesting because in my most recent relationship, where like all of this stuff came out from the shadow, and the ayahuasca and the plant medicine and all this self-work, I found a man who I wanted to nurture, and he wanted nurturing, but it didn't feel like a safe enough container because of whatever was going on in his business and whatever was going on in my personal life, that like I would, I'm a chef by trade first. And so I would cook dinner and do all these things. And then I would resent him. And it wasn't about him. I resented
Why?
myself
Why
because
did you resent him?
I resented him because I didn't feel safe enough with him to fully surrender, because he didn't feel safe enough with himself. And so it wasn't really about me resenting him. I resented myself for staying in a relationship that didn't feel safe.
I understand.
So, but all of that just to share, because, our environments, how we are brought up, they create so much of our realities until we decide to face them and
Right.
change. So yeah, I think this goes back to like where we began, of like the fight is within, or whatever, this somatic, whatever we're carrying in our bodies that are creating our realities, until we clean and clear them so we can
Yeah.
see through new eyes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well,
Uh,
relationships are, yeah, they're everybody's talking about them. It's never ending.
yeah.
They're hard, and I think they're our greatest teachers. I know I've learned so much from my relationship and all the relationships that I've had along the way, and that's forget ayahuasca. I remember when I was going out my first ayahuasca ceremony, and my friend was like, "You're gonna go out into the desert with a bunch of people you don't know and drink some crazy medicine and go, lose your mind?" I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "Man, you're brave. You're crazy." And I said, "Dude, you're married with 2 kids. Like you're in an ayahuasca ceremony every day."
Literally. Yeah. I mean, so even in that, like I made an active decision to not date for, now it's been like a year and a half, and I've started dating again, but after this breakup, because it was like the most intense ayahuasca ceremony I've ever experienced. Like the entering into that and the grief of leaving and what else it came up, brought out for me. And I think so many women, maybe men too, can relate to this. Like so many people I know, they date from one to the next, and there's no space to integrate what happened, what was learned from the
Hmm.
relationship. And so
Hmm.
you just bring all the shit into the next one. And so for me,
Right.
I'm no longer dating myself. I need to be so committed, marry myself before I actually call in the person I want to spend the next foreseeable future with.
Yeah.
And it was the most liberating thing to just be like, no, like I'm such a no, because, I lived so much of my story chasing like Prince Charming to save me, to fix me, to hold me, so I wouldn't
Hmm.
have to deal with my own stuff.
Right.
And so now, like, I'm fully aligned. Like, I want to be taken care. Like, yes, I want to be taken care of, whatever that
Right.
looks like. Like, yes, and like what I'm a no for out the bat. And I think when you do so much of this introspective work, somatic work, when you know yourself to the extent that you do, and you're always on that journey, then you know what is no longer for you. You're no longer attracting, from the shadow place. And if you
Yeah.
are, you can catch it quicker than you. And so I
Right.
see,
Right.
in your relationship now with your fiance, as you said, it's been a journey, but like you've chosen to dance together. So when things do come up, honoring that there is something there, and also in dancing through it instead of running from it.
Yeah. 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 Exactly. Yeah. We made, well, and safety is created when you make a commitment. Yeah. There was something there was something that was different from all the relationships before, and I knew that in my mind. There was at first that was off-putting because I'm like, this isn't like any other relationship I've had. But then I kept thinking, well, all those other relationships didn't work out, so maybe this is a good sign.
Right.
And I had to trust that, and eventually I saw and understood that. But yeah, relationship patterns are very hard to break out of. You know, we're longing to get the thing that we wanted but didn't get from our parents, and we're trying to get it in our romantic partners, but we of course we can't, because that time has come and gone, and we're not a child anymore, we're an adult. And so we place, you know, that demand on our partners, and then when it's not fulfilled, which it can't be, we're frustrated and disappointed and resentful. And that's the pattern that I was in for a long time, like just creating it over and over and over again. And until I finally, you know, had to take responsibility and come to terms and grieve like what I wanted and didn't receive, so I could really come into adulthood and have a more mature relationship. And so, you know, I can imagine for you, if your dad wasn't really present for you, you know, that must have been painful. Like, you know, and I think a lot of men are like that. I mean, I even feel that instinct in me where it's like I'm providing, so like that's enough. Okay. Like I just want to check out now. But it's no, part of my responsibility in the relationship is to be present, you know, with her, and quality time and affection and cuddling and lovemaking, and that's a really like that I need to nurture the relationship in my own way. And maybe, you know, very often it's the woman that's wanting more of that, you know, but it's always good for me. So
Mm,
in that place, I follow her lead.
yeah.
You know, it's
And
like, you know, and it's like I'll surrender to that need because it's actually really, really good for me. And you know, yeah, I know how important it is for, you know, you have to be, for, I don't know, the guys listening, but it's all about presence. Like you have to be present with your woman. It's like with her. That's really the main thing. And I think a lot of guys don't really know how to be present. I didn't know how to be present for a long time with myself, never mind with my woman. But once you do that, something happens where they can really feel you, and that they can relax. And in that moment, that I think that's where the surrender can happen, and that they'll really begin to trust you. But
it's
it's
even
not, you know,
when you said
yeah,
like earlier about things happen when you're not present, be it cameras or otherwise. I think it
right.
not dissimilar. And in terms of like the man, I just want to speak to this because my dad is the most incredible dad. I love him more than anything in the world. But like you said, I don't think that men know how to be present. Like he didn't know how. It wasn't because he
Hmm.
didn't want to, it's that he didn't know
Yeah.
how. He did what he could. And I also like I hold him in that because it was the best that he could, it was like, and in that too, because I called in men similar that didn't know how to be present. And I saw what happened when they weren't. And it was bad. Like I couldn't trust them because their lack of presence didn't allow me to trust that they could hold me fully because they
Right.
couldn't fully hold themselves.
Right. Exactly.
So, gosh, I mean, but at the same time, like I have so much faith and joy around like love and relationship because I think they're the most, as challenging as they are, they're what we're here for, the
Yeah.
connection. We're not supposed to live alone. So, okay, well, all of that. Thank you for having this conversation with me. I think if you were to leave everyone listening with one thing when it comes to learning themselves, I always say learning yourself to love yourself, or the journey, like even if it gets hard, don't give up kind of thing. Like what was it for you that you just continued on the path, or you continue on it? Like why?
It's fun. It's fun to learn about yourself. It's for me, it's my life's work, really. I didn't realize that till my cousin said it to me one day. He's like, "Oh, it's your life's work." I was like, "Oh, right, yeah." But it's not everybody's life, life's work, and some people have other things that they're interested in, other jobs. But I think the main thing is to, you want to find some kind of practice of self-reflection, whether that's journaling or meditation or the occasional retreat or something, something where you make contact with your inner world, because there's a lot of information in there, and you want access to that information. You want access to that wisdom. You want access to your intuition, to those innermost voices. You want to make as much of the unconscious conscious as you can, knowing that you'll never do it perfectly. So I think that's the first thing. And to do what feels good to you. Don't put pressure on yourself. Don't resist, but also don't put pressure on yourself. Like, you have to find the thing that's aligned for you. I think the second thing I would say is you have to have a tremendous amount of compassion for yourself. You can't do any kind of work if you don't have compassion for yourself, because as you learn to discover things about yourself, not all of those things are pleasant to learn, and it's very easy to turn against yourself as you wake up to deeper levels of truth about who you are, and about your own behavior. And that's a trick, right? When we turn against ourselves in those places. So, we all adapted, we all in our childhoods to survive our childhoods. We all, and so all of our issues, all of our problems, the ways we procrastinate or self-sabotage or whatever it is, they're not character defects. They're just expression, they're symptoms of ways in which we had to shape ourselves in order to get through our childhood. And so that's like that. I think framing is just so important, that there's actually nothing wrong with you. Your operating system may need to be tuned up a bit, debugged,
Mhm.
cleaned out,
Yeah.
but there's actually nothing fundamentally wrong with the computer that is you. And to know that, and to not turn on yourself, which is not an easy thing to do. But yeah, if you can love yourself. And then I think the third thing would just be, this is the most important thing for me, is you can't do it alone. You need other people. Like, the most important thing is to live in community. You have to have a community. And communities are difficult because people are annoying, and they there's people are lazy, and they say stupid things, and they have bad ideas, and you have to put up with them. And it's like, why we do we, all this stuff. But that's what life is. And so it's very important to get involved. Like, sitting at home scrolling by yourself, no, we're tribal. We're meant to live in tribes. We're meant to be around people. And so, if you find yourself isolated, like, you have to make a commitment to being in some kind of community. And I don't care if it's like a Tuesday night bowling league, something. You need to be in relationship with people, because that's how you're going to learn about yourself.
Amen. That is absolutely how you're going to learn about yourself. And sometimes those lessons can be quite confronting. Thank you so much for your time. It was a joy to talk to you and learn from you, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Olivia. Appreciate you.
Yeah.